Hey there, I'm Ryan with Symbiosis. We're here in beautiful Spicewood, Texas in the early spring. I wanted to come to you today with some thoughts about how to maintain your gardens and landscapes in the early spring. There's a lot of things that we can be doing at this time that are really opportune, that are easier than if we wait, and there's a lot of things where, if we do them now while they're easy, we're also preventing bad outcomes that we'll have to sort of suffer through later in the summer. So in this, greatest of all times to be outside in Texas, I am going to recommend that you be doing some chores, but I'm going to walk you through how I do them, how I approach them. And really what we're talking about here is not my favorite word, but the one you would be familiar with is weeding. Some plants, a weed is something that you don't want in the context of the place you're maintaining. So no plant is a weed in all situations, but many plants might be a weed in your garden. I have a few that I think should be on almost everyone's blacklist of plants that are not invited in the garden, that ought to be removed. And today I'm also going to try to introduce you to some that you might, if you took a very, very broad clearing approach of removing all of the plants from certain areas. There are plant allies that you might miss, that you might think are weeds and remove accidentally when actually they're beneficial medicinals. They add to the soil health, they support other plant life. So I'm going to introduce you to some friends and some foes in the garden, teach you how to identify them. And hopefully what you will come away with is a very good sense of how you can make these decisions for yourself, for your context, so that you have all of the plants that you want, that you do find to be allies, and that you don't have any of the plants that you don't like, that you do find to be noxious. So we'll walk around the garden here, find some of them, profile them for you, and it'll be a good way to use the spring day.
This video is made possible by our patrons. Their support allows us to continue to share our educational resources, knowledge, and make these videos for you to enjoy. We have just launched our new tier of support. To get access to additional content from our projects, Q&A priority, and more, click the link below.
We're in this critical phase right now of spring weed growth, and as Ryan likes to say, weeds are just free plants. And so nature's giving us a bunch of free plants, but we need to go through and we need to select which ones we're gonna keep and which ones we're gonna cycle back into the soil through chop and drop or syntropic system management. And so if we don't do that, then a lot of these things are gonna go to seed, and next spring there's gonna be more of them, and they're gonna kind of compete with some of these other things, and the garden will look more messy and more out of control. But if we get this done right now, then it's gonna look good through the summertime. So that's what we're gonna do. And a lot of times, especially when you're approaching a big space like this and you've gotten behind on it, which happens to everybody, life sneaks up on you, it can feel really overwhelming. So what I like to do is I like to break it down into one small area and say, okay, I'm gonna get this done in 20, 30 minutes, and then I'm gonna take a break and I'm gonna reassess the next area. And if I break it down into chunks like that, then eventually, if I can just work on it for 30 minutes or an hour a day, and I just keep at that until it's done, then eventually it gets done. So I'm going to show you guys the things that I like to use when I'm resetting a system. And first of all, gloves, very important. I like these gloves because they give me enough dexterity, but they protect my hands a little bit at least. And then down here on the ground, I have my pruners in a holster. That's really important because I need to be able to take them out, prune something, and put them away quickly. And then I've got my grass knife, and I've got this special tool, which I bought at Natural Gardener. I'm actually not even sure what it's called, honestly, but it's made by Bare Bones Tools, and I like it for being able to pull out roots and being able to disturb small weeds quickly and easily and cut them off at the base. So this is the area I'm gonna be working on and resetting, and first I'm gonna focus on the taller weeds, and I'm gonna go ahead and cut those off at the base with the grass knife, and I'm gonna lay them down as mulch around the plants and then that I wanna keep. And then I'm gonna work on the woody stuff, the trees that are volunteering that would just be too big if we let them grow here. And then once I've done those two things, I'll be able to see better what's going on in here, and then I'll be able to decide on what my next steps are.
So here's the setting in our garden. As you can see, there's lots of plants. In the spring, they're growing all on top of each other. So this is a place where, somebody might say, oh, I have to take all that stuff out. It feels like a chore that you don't want to get into, but really there's some really good plants here that we want to find and save, our plant allies, and we want to identify the few plants that do need to be removed. So looking at this little space, what I see are these false carrots. This is the top of my blacklist. We're catching it at a perfect time to weed it. As you can see, it's about to put out flowers, but hasn't yet. It has created this spire. You can always pick it out by its very carrot-like leaves. And anything that looks like a carrot and isn't a carrot is probably quite dangerous for you to eat. These will produce little stickers that will stick to your shoelaces and your pants and your dog and your cat. They'll come into your house. They'll go into the laundry. You'll find them in the lining of your underwear and your socks. They're a terror, and they are good to remove. And when they are at this age, they come out just so very easily. And usually, because they come from seeding themselves, you will find a collection of them in an area rather than just one at a time. Here's another. Each one, I'm able to get the root with relatively little effort. Let's look at some of the other plants in the area. This one I am IDing as a cilantro plant. So this is a great winter ground cover. It'll grow up, have these white flowers. The seeds are coriander. They can be ground into a spice or they can be replanted. I also notice here, one of my favorites, this is a small plantain. I believe they call it ribwort in some areas. These leaves, when crushed, will reduce the pain from an insect bite or a sting. So they are very handy to identify and leave around. Also in this area, I see much ragweed. Ragweed is one that in aggregate causes allergies, so people often like to remove it. I would remove it as necessary so that it doesn't smother other plants, but I wouldn't go out of my way to clear it from every, corner of your land necessarily. Maybe if you're a distinct allergy sufferer. And then the last one that I would point out is, a common dandelion. So this is one where I wouldn't say it has to be on your blacklist by any means. In a pinch, you could eat it and it would be quite nutritious. And there's good medicine to be made from the root of it. And the long taproot breaks up the soil, improving the quality of it over time. So you might see quite a few dandelions in one year, and then they might improve the soil so much that you see none in the next year. So I think they're a good one to leave if there's not a specific reason to remove them, based on another plant that's around them or something like that.
So weeding and doing it well and interacting with a system like this, you do have to do some plant ID. You have to understand the growth habits of different plants so that you can make good decisions. So really one of the first things that I'm going to be working on cutting out of the system is this wild lettuce or miner's lettuce. You can see it shoots up really tall and it's about to put on a seed head here. So I'm going to cut all that down and that's going to provide more visibility. I know a lot of these plants are things that we planted, like this Turk's cap, this inland sea oats. There's some mealy blue sage, salvia over there, and there is some black-eyed Susan wildflowers growing in here. So there's a lot of stuff that I can just visually identify, like, okay, we planted that's meant to be there. So I'm gonna pull out other stuff that's around it, and I'm just gonna put that mulch down on the ground. I'm also gonna cut down anything that becomes a big tree. So like these American elms, there's a few willows that are volunteering in here. There's just not space for more big trees in this system. That's not the intent of this garden, to be a forest, unless it's a small fruit tree or native tree, in which case we'll keep it.
I wanted to take a second to talk about the situation in which, it might not matter what the other plants are. Maybe they're totally innocuous and you don't mind having them around. But here we have this elderberry plant, and what I have noticed about elderberry is that it will grow to the point that it is crowded by other plants. So clearing around it allows it to grow bigger in one season than it could otherwise. So here, you know, I've got some sorghum grasses that I do not mind having around. I like them to cover these berms and these growing areas where I don't have a specifically selected plant. But around this one, I am going to clear everything that's growing around it so that it has the space it needs to grow and be successful. So that's another way that we can think about clearing and weeding. Or again, if we're saying that a weed is a plant we don't want in a certain context, well, there are certain contexts around our selected plants where anything growing would be a weed. But we don't want to treat our whole garden in that way because it would have a lot of bad outcomes and it would create a lot of really onerous chores that you don't want to do and that I don't particularly want to do either. So targeted clearing becomes a really useful tool that prevents us from having to do these chores in like a wholesale way that's tiring and not fun for anyone.
And so I'm finding bare ground, and as I cut these plants out, I'm putting them down on that bare ground. And sometimes you're gonna cut something by accident, something that you don't mean to cut, and that's okay. Nature will give you more free plants next season. Or you can always get some seeds or buy some starts at the nursery.
Why do it to yourself? There's nobody, your mom's not here to tell you, honey, go pick all those dandelions. You're an adult, you can say, Mom, I like the dandelions and I'm gonna keep them. This is another good example of a marginal case. So here we've got a vetch and here we've got an evergreen sumac. So evergreen sumac is the plant that we want to grow in this space, right? And vetch is a very helpful plant in a lot of circumstances. It enriches the soil, it goes really well into compost, and in the moments when you do need to weed it, it delightfully will come up just ever so easily, all in a bunch. So while vetch is a beneficial plant, it does grow long and crawl. So next to this small evergreen, I'm concerned that it will grow onto and over it and cause some harm. So in this case, I'm gonna pull the vetch. But if it were growing somewhere else where I wasn't going to walk and maybe trip over it, I would definitely leave it alone. But it's a great example of something where it's generally an ally, but maybe in a specific space, we do want to pull it just there.
Sometimes the grass knife is not cooperating and I'll just pull it out by the roots. I'd rather not pull it out by the roots because partly there's all this soil that comes out with it and I don't want to move the soil out of the garden, so I'm going to go ahead and just shake it off. The other thing is when I can cut it off more at the base and it's not like taking up too much time and energy, and then I'm leaving those roots in the soil to decompose, so those are feeding the soil. I know I can do that with this plant because it doesn't just grow back from the roots really easily, but some plants you need to pull them out by the root. Otherwise they'll just grow right back and you'll have to do it again. If you're just trying to produce biomass and build the soil, that can be a really beneficial thing. So there we go. It's just been a couple of plants actually, and I've got almost all the miner's lettuce out. Because I can't see where I'm stepping, I'm going slowly, I'm making noise. I don't want to wake up any snakes by accident. So that took about 5 minutes, and I've got all of the taller annual weeds, which, you know, the term weeds is kind of philosophical, right? The plants that I'm selecting that don't have a place in this system right now are weeds. So I've gone ahead and I've pulled them out and I've laid them down on the ground. Now we've got this nice mulch here. It's going to help the rain infiltrate. It's going to help suppress further weed growth. And now I'm going to start pruning out. So I'm switching tools now to the pruners, all of the little baby trees that are coming up here that would just take up too much space. So right now I'm pruning elm trees and I'm just chopping those out at the base. They're not going to come back from the roots. Of course, there's more seeds here, so this is not going to be the last time we see elms growing. There's a seed bank that probably is for hundreds of years now. There's been elms and pecans dropping seeds, and you know, I just don't have time today, but of course you could always dig these up. Like here's a little pecan seedling, and I hate to cut a pecan seedling, but you could easily just dig those up. This is a tree that looks very much like poison ivy. I think it's a box elder tree. I could be wrong about that. I'm sure the internet will let me know. Oh, and you know, here's a cool thing about spending time in your garden. You're gonna find bugs you've never even seen before. Is that a spider? No, it's an insect. But it moves kind of like a spider. I don't even know what that guy is.
Here's another one that I want to talk about. This is a thistle. So thistles are edible, and you can make medicine out of them. They're also extremely spiky, and they get really big throughout the year. So while this would be on a lot of people's blacklist just for the noxious quality of thorns and pokers, this is one that I try to leave. It's also great at recovering the soil, and it tends to move. Having this here this year does not mean that there's going to be one here next year. And the general context that I'm in is that this is actually pretty far away from normal pathways, from entrances, exits, from places that the dogs go. So trying my best to leave as many of these as I can in any area where they're not going to affect anybody negatively, I am choosing to leave this one. But you do want to recognize what this looks like at this size, because it will get much bigger and it will send a very tall spire, and they can just deny areas to you, you know, if there's several of them. So this is a good plant to know and to remove sparingly.
Okay, so as I'm working my way through, there's an example of a plant I'm not going to pull right here, and that is this chickweed. You can see it's covering this whole area in a carpet, and it's covering the ground. It's soft, it's not pokey. You know, there's benefits to this plant here, and it's covering an area that doesn't have anything else growing in it right now. I do see there's a little bit of comfrey that has come over from these other more successful comfrey plants that's going to grow in here. But if I were to just remove all this right now and I didn't have anything to plant in its place, then I'm just creating another void that nature's going to fill. So sometimes if it's a benign enough weed plant, native plant, free plant, then I will just leave it until further time. And really, as it gets hot, this plant is going to start to self-select and die out anyway. So that's the most important thing when it comes to managing systems, is learning about the plants. And you can do that so easily now. You know, you can use Google Lens, you can use iNaturalist. There's all sorts of services that can help you learn about plants and their growth habits and their place within the overall ecosystem. So I've noticed the hardest thing about weeding and maintaining a system is actually just getting started on it. It's always gratifying. It's more gratifying than I think it's going to be, and there's like this mental hurdle to just get started on it. And then at least for me, once I get started on it, then I feel compelled to continue until it's done. So if I can just get past that mental hurdle of, well, I don't want to do that right now or whatever, and I just think like, well, if I don't do that right now, it's going to be more work later, and I get started, then I always feel better about it once I've just started. So this is a cilantro plant that has gone to seed, and it makes these really beautiful spherical seed heads that are, when they're dried, they're coriander, which is another kind of spice. And really, this plant, I've seen it kind of naturalize and start to spread and self-seed through gardens. And so whenever I see this, it makes me happy, because this is a good, useful, beneficial weed plant. And what I like to do is I like to let the seed heads dry out. Here's some dried seed heads on it, which you can see. And then I like to take this plant and I like to walk through the garden, and I find some bare spaces where we've got room, and I just sprinkle those seeds out. And you can do that with the whole plant. Of course, you can keep some for your kitchen. And then that way, instead of constantly fighting weeds just by pulling them, you're actually taking some of the weeds that have been successful that you like, and you're starting to propagate those out into the system. And they're going to be the ones that fight the weeds that you don't want in the future for you, just by growing and holding that space.
So I wanted to zoom in again on our friend, the false carrot, who again is at the top of my blacklist. I wanted us to look at this one because it's at a later stage of development than the one I showed you earlier. What you can see is some of the flowers, they tend to look like baby's breath. and can be used, if you are a flower ranger, you can use this as baby's breath very effectively in its season. So that's a good quality of this plant. But you can also see the little burrs developing here. So they come right after flower set. So while you saw me hand pull these earlier, I am gonna say if you see a large area of these with the flowers on, that's one of the few moments when I'm gonna recommend that you get out a weed whacker and just come knock them as low to the ground as you can. These are annuals and they're extremely seasonal. So knocking them down at this stage where they have flowers will probably prevent them from seeding in that season. So it's a good alternative. It's always better, always easier to catch them earlier and remove them by the root. But you know, sometimes you find that back corner of the property where they all are, and you know the dog goes, and you know the dog will bring the burrs back, and it's worth just knocking them all back so that that doesn't happen. Well, thanks for coming out with us on this beautiful day. I hope this has inspired you to get out in your garden and to look at all the plants. I think one of the best things that we can do as far as reframing chores that we don't want to do into a fun thing that we do want to do is to just consider this spring season to be the season that you get a bunch of free plants from nature. They're native, they're adapted, they're planted in the correct place, and all you really need to do is decide if you want to keep all of them or only some of them. And you need to figure out how to make them fit with the things that you have planted in past years or the things that you intend to plant in this year. What I do want to mention is that, you know, this was just a look at some of the plants that we found out in this exact location on this exact day. So your mileage may vary. You may find very different plants. You may find very different relative numbers of the plants in your location. And that's good. There is not a one-size-fits-all answer to, you know, which plants you should be removing and which ones you should be selecting and supporting. A couple other ones that are really common in Central Texas that I do want to mention is the sand burr, colloquially known as the sticker burr. That's probably one of the most important plants for each of us to try to identify in our area, try to identify it young, try and remove it before it can seed, because the stickers are painful and you'll be mad. You will be mad that you didn't do it if you don't do it. So that's a great one to look for. And there's also, you know, we looked at a star thistle today. There's also a globe thistle, which is the same sort of problems with spikes and things, but it also does put off a burr that spreads. There are things like poison ivy and poison oak that you want to be able to identify. But what we're really talking about is the blacklist should be very specifically things that have very noxious properties that can harm you or someone you care about. And we want to remove all of those, and otherwise we want to be permissive because we want to grow to understand the plants around us more. And I think if we you know, just stick to removing things that we can identify and have a specific reason to take out rather than taking everything out at this time of year, you know, all our gardens are going to be more lush. They're going to have more fertility, more pollinators, all of the things that we like and want out of a garden. So I appreciate you spending the time to watch this video. You know, we've got a blog going into some more details on the website, and I will be back in the late spring with some more information. As the season changes, there'll be more and different things to do, and we'll check in then.
All right, hey, thanks guys. Appreciate you watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to learn more about what we do, how we do it, why we do it, you can hop over to our website. There's tons of good articles. You can join our newsletter. You can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. We'd love to see you there and answer your questions. Thanks again. Enjoy.